Hello and welcome to the Eating Disorder Therapist podcast. This is a podcast to help you find peace with food and overcome disordered eating. And I'm Harriet Frew, aka the Eating Disorder Therapist, and I'm so excited to be sharing with you all kinds of stories, tips, information and guest interviews to help you on your journey in finding peace with food. So thank you so much for listening today. So today I have another guest on the show and I'm speaking to Katrina Smale. Katrina is an English teacher in training and she is somebody who has recovered from atypical anorexia nervosa. Now, Katrina had quite a difficult experience with her eating disorder and was in 3 different hospitals for different kinds of treatment over the course of time. And it wasn't until really later on in her treatment that she met a consultant who was really, really helpful. And this was a kind of turning point in her recovery as she felt that she was able to kind of get to the deeper issues of the eating disorder and really kind of make a sort of turning point in recovery. So really looking forward to speaking to Katrina and hearing more about her experiences. I know she really wants to inspire hope in others that they can seek treatment too. She wants to also highlight some of the problems with current NHS support, but also some of the positives about this too. And yeah, really just to kind of help others understand they're not alone and to share experiences and openness to inspire you in your own recovery journey. So let's get to the interview. Hi, Katrina, and thank you so much for coming on the podcast today.
All right.
So, Katrina, could you just tell us a little bit more about yourself and sort of what's brought you here today?
So really, I am somebody who has, I guess, struggled with eating disorders in the past and in various types, I suppose, because of various things. And as a result of that, I have then experienced treatment within the NHS. And I guess it's mainly that treatment that I just want to, I suppose, discuss with you, I suppose, and to just make people aware of how eating disorders are treated and perhaps what doesn't work. And yeah, I suppose it's then just offering a perspective from somebody who has experienced it, I guess, and then to just open up any help to anybody else who needs it.
Sure. Okay. No, sounds great. And it sounds like, I guess over the years, it sounds like you probably had quite a few different experiences that you'll be able to talk about today. Yeah. So, Katrina, can we even just go back, back to when you were a sort of little girl and your relationship with food? Can you sort of identify maybe when the problem first began?
Yeah, I suppose again, because of the treatment, it's been something that I've reflected on quite a lot. And as a child, I was a very fussy eater. I was one of those that I was an absolute pain for my mum, I guess, up until about 20, I suppose, when the quote unquote eating disorder really kicked in. And so, yeah, my eating was always very up and down. And when I did go through periods of anything that was a little bit traumatic, I would just stop eating altogether. And yeah, so it was very frustrating, I suppose, for my mum and for my family being grown up, because if we had to go out to a restaurant or anything like that, my mum would have to pull somebody aside and just be like, "Can you just do a plain pasta and cheese? Because that's all she's going to eat." So yeah, it was a little bit of a pain, I suppose. But I suppose it's then something that has started from when I was very young, and it just continued as I got older, I suppose, because that's just how I learned how to cope with things, was to then control food, I guess, in that respect.
So when you were a little girl, it was more that you were a fussy eater, was it? It wasn't that you sort of were trying to sort of change your weight and shape at all?
No, I mean, I suppose that's the difference with the way that my eating disorder has presented itself, in that it's nothing to do with that. When I have even been at my lowest, I was able to stand in front of a mirror and say, "Do you know what? I look like a zombie. I look awful." And yeah, I've never had any of those thoughts of being overweight or wanting to change the way that I look to be underweight or anything like that. It is mainly just brought on by periods of stress and then depression that comes with that. And yeah, I guess through a lot of my treatment and reflecting back on where it all started, I then did start to realise that depression has been something as well that has been with me the majority of my life. And yeah, which was quite a sad revelation, I suppose, because I was trying to think back on it and I was just like, you know what, I can't actually remember a time where I was actually happy in myself, I suppose, even if there was kind of happy things going on around me. I just always found it quite hard, I guess, to see any happiness in it. So yeah, and again, that is something that I have come to realise over the course of treatment and different therapies. So yeah, I suppose, and it just then as then, if anything that's kind of happened as I've grown up, anything that's been traumatic or stressful, I just have reverted back to just not eating very much as a way to cope, I guess.
Sure. So it sounds like in a way, like your presentation in a way was more atypical, although I think not any less serious, just want to really make that point. But it's almost like it wasn't really driven by, the illness wasn't driven for you by weight and shape concerns, but it was quite linked to your mental health and perhaps low mood.
Yeah, definitely. Which is always something, I suppose, then going through treatment, it was always something that at first I believed, I guess, and I was awkward because at first I went into daycare and the nurses there were, I suppose, they were almost trying to put that problem onto me, and they were constantly then questioning me about like how I felt about my weight and everything. And then as soon as I started thinking about it and started saying, well, actually, I'm not really bothered if I end up putting a bit of weight on or anything like that, they almost calling me a little bit of a liar. And then that was the same during some of my inpatient treatments, is that because obviously that was the way that it was presenting itself in the loss of weight and things like that, it was very difficult to find somebody who was actually going to listen to the fact that actually it's something else. So for a long time, it took a while for me to actually get treatment for the underlying problem rather than just the presentation and the symptoms. Sure. Yeah, and throughout my admissions as well, that I've actually, and I'm still in contact with a few of them now, but one of the girls who I got very close with in my second admission, hers was quite similar. And again, it took a long time for her to actually get somebody to listen to what she was kind of saying. But now she's in Malta now. She's actually set up her own mental health charity, I suppose, in Malta. And she gets people out literally just walking and talking about mental health. So, yeah. So that's been quite positive.
Sure. So it sounds like you found someone, a sort of kindred spirit there who understood. Yeah. It sounds like maybe it was quite frustrating for you if people assumed you had weight and shape concerns when you didn't feel that was relevant for you. Yeah, it definitely was. And I think then that ended up forming a lot of my opinions about my treatment, I guess, and the treatment process, particularly then in my second admission, because I think the first one, I suppose anybody who's had multiple admissions, you go into the first one thinking it's all going to be lovely and it's all going to be happy ever after at the end. But then obviously it wasn't. And then, during my second admission, that was when it was mainly quite frustrating. I suppose particularly because I had a consultant who was also a consultant in my first admission, but I didn't have her. I had the other consultant who, she was lovely. She was so nice. But then this consultant had a bit of a reputation, I suppose. And then, as soon as I then got into my second admission and they told me who my consultant was, it was one of those moments where I went, oh, because I just knew instantly that we just wouldn't get on, which wasn't very nice. But I think, it's just mainly that whole, I suppose because a lot of people, it is a lot of girls and men that go into eating disorder treatments, that is their main problem. And it is all about the weight, it is all about how they look. And arguably because of that, it's no wonder that is then the accepted reason for everybody's, or the weight, or I suppose that is the only way you can really say it, that is the accepted reason as to why everybody who ends up going into treatment has that eating disorder in the first place. It's tricky, isn't it? Because I think obviously it's one of the main sort of diagnostic sort of features, or, you know, in when you're classifying anorexia nervosa, for a large percentage of people, it is very much driven by weight and shape concerns, although probably not just by that. I think it's often it's multifaceted almost. But I think, you know, I think you're absolutely not alone. I can kind of think of, you know, quite a lot of people I've worked with over the years where the weight shape issue hasn't really been central. And I think sadly sometimes that can almost develop as a secondary thing once you've come into eating disorder services, because you suddenly become much more aware of weight and shape.
Yeah.
But could you say a bit more, Katrina, about what, like you talked about kind of not eating when something stressful or traumatic came up or something. So how do you think not eating was helping you cope?
Oh, I think it goes back to that whole of like needing control when things feel out of control, I guess. And even as a child, well, I suppose as a child, you're not really in control of very much. Your parents do everything for you. They cart you around everywhere. They send you off to school. And choosing whether or not to put something in your mouth is one of the only things that you do still have control over. So I suppose subconsciously it was, my brain's kind of saying to me, like, look, this is something you can control. Things are feeling a bit, you know, chaotic at the minute. Yeah. And then I suppose whenever anything like that was going on, I would work myself up to feel quite anxious. And then because of that anxiety, obviously then it can go either way. Either people decide, or people get hungry, or people lose their appetite. And because of that anxiety that I ended up building up around anything stressful, I would just lose my appetite and I would actually feel quite sick. And then it developed this fear of sickness and this fear of being sick. So then I just wouldn't eat, because I was like, well, if I don't eat, I can't be sick. So yeah, I think it just goes back to that whole needing control. And as I was growing up, I was always somebody who didn't really say very much. I was very quiet. And I suppose as well, it kind of then was me saying, actually, I need a little bit of help here. And that was my only way that I could think of to communicate it, because I didn't know how to communicate it any other way. So I think it was very I suppose, as you say, multifaceted, and there's a lot of levels to it of how it ended up developing, and then I suppose tipping over the edge as I got older.
Sure. Well, I think it's so helpful actually just like explaining that. So I'm sure like there'll be people listening as well that might really just relate to some of the things you're talking about, because I think we often forget sometimes in a way an eating disorder, and yes, it is about food, but actually it's not really about food as well. It's about some of these deeper issues, isn't it? And like you say, like, you know, if you're feeling out of control and you're perhaps feeling like life is a bit stressful and chaotic, you know, having control around food is often one of the things that we can control, isn't it? So it can be something to kind of cling on to, really. And also as well, signaling to others maybe that you're not okay if you can't say that through words. You know, it's a way of communicating, isn't it? Do you think as well with sort of eating, sort of not eating as well, what impact did that have on your kind of anxiety and stress? Like, did you feel some relief, like kind of numbing of your emotions when you were not eating?
Yeah, I found that because when I was younger, it wouldn't really last that long, only really a couple of days. But I would find that on the maybe like second day, I guess, that would then be when I would start to feel a bit numb. And I suppose as well, because I wasn't eating, it was giving me a lot of time to literally just kind of sit in my room. And it was then through doing that, and I suppose isolating myself, that in a sense it did give me that sense of relief, where I was like, okay, I can just be in my own space and nobody's going to interrupt me. I don't have to do anything. I can just sit here and feel sad and feel stressed and then move on afterwards. I suppose that was what was kind of going on in my mind, was that I just wanted some place to be by myself and have no kind of interruptions, and to just numb what I was feeling. And that became ever more present the older that I got as well. And still kind of reverted back to that way of coping, that the numbing I found that it came quicker each time. And so, yeah, that then becomes quite addictive, I think, because anything's going wrong in my life, I can just revert back to this and I can just numb myself from it and just completely shut off from it. And I don't have to talk about it. I can just be here by myself and just feel numb for a little while. And yeah, that does become quite addictive, I think. But then also, I guess an extension to that, because you're not talking about how you feel about things and you're not opening up about your feelings, that was when the depression started to really sink in a bit, I think, with me, because I wasn't allowing myself to actually talk about anything or about how I was feeling about anything, which was a massive cause of frustration for my mum in particular, because she was watching me do this, but she couldn't do anything about it. And she was giving me, at one point, she was making sure that I was having some like build-up shakes a couple of times a day, just so that I wasn't getting into any kind of trouble medically. But again, because I was young, she was bringing those to me. As I got older, I could choose not to have them and just be like, actually, no, I don't want it. So yeah, but I mean, like me and my mum have had family therapy, and all of this has kind of been discussed quite openly with her. And that I would kind of say to anybody, I suppose, who is struggling with it, if you are offered family therapy, I would say to do it and to have that safe space where you can talk about what it is that's going on, because having that level of understanding between both you and your parents, it has built mine and my mum's relationship to be a lot stronger than what it was. And now I'm quite open with her about things, and she's very open with me about things. So yeah, so I guess it's had a positive in that respect.
Sure. And do you feel there was a big shift after having some family therapy? Do you, in terms of just you being able to talk to your mum and your dad being able to respond helpfully to you?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, my mum and dad are actually separated, and I did want to have family therapy with my dad, but we could never sort it out where he was free. So that is still something that I haven't really been able to talk to him about. So that is still kind of, pending. But with regards to my mum, it definitely, because our relationship was very volatile as I was growing up. I think mainly because of the reason that I didn't talk about anything. I just didn't talk, and that was just really frustrating for her. And I guess I as well, I wanted her to be my best friend. And I always said that I was jealous of girls whose mums were their best friend, because I felt like my mum was against me and she was my enemy because of how volatile our relationship was. And then I was quite a daddy's girl, and, wanted to be with my dad a lot because of the fact that I suppose I just felt a bit safer with him, because we didn't have that clash. We didn't clash like that. But then arguably that's because he wasn't there all the time. We only saw him every other weekend. Then there are things that have happened with, I guess, like my dad as a whole, that has affected me as well. So it would be nice to be able to speak to him about it. But I think being able to talk to my mum and opening up to my mum about what was going on, it has built my confidence to be able to just approach my dad when the time is right to do so, and to just do that myself and conduct it all myself without there having to be that safe space.
Sure.
So, yeah.
No, it sounds like that was really helpful. And because it sounds like in a way you and your mum were probably really, really, very, very close, but the communication had broken down. But it sounds like you kind of found your way back to one another, haven't you? And you're closer than ever now. So Katrina, can you talk a bit more about, I understand on your final admission, you had a very good relationship with your consultant, is that right? And that was a bit of a shift for you.
Yeah, it definitely was. I mean, as I said, the first admission I'd built it up to be this amazing thing, and it was all sunshine and rainbows. My consultant then was lovely, and she was more than open to help me and just kind of facilitate me getting along. Second, to be honest, I suppose between me and my friend who's in Malta, we played it a little bit, and I almost saw it a little bit like a game, because of the consultant's attitude, I suppose, towards the both of us. Yeah, it was almost just like, okay, we'll do what you want us to do, but we are going to fight you every way almost. And then it just became us really trying to get out, I suppose. and not be in that environment. But yeah, the last admission was something that I pursued myself rather than there being any intervention from the doctors or anything like that. So that is another thing with me. I've never been sectioned. It's always been something that, I've gone involuntary. So it wasn't as if like the last admission was forced on me or anything like that. I was in uni at the time and living away from home. So I was still under the services, so still within the eating disorder services, and they partnered and were in constant contact with a consultant. And I actually asked if I could see her because it was getting to that point that I knew myself that I was getting into a bit of a danger zone in terms of my weight, and I was desperate for it not to go the way that it had in previous kind of admissions, I guess. And I was actually above because obviously they base everything off of your BMI and your weight and everything like that. I was above the quote unquote criteria for that at the time. But after speaking to her and just telling her everything, she was the first one to turn around to me and say, do you know what, I actually believe exactly like everything that you have said. I believe you. I don't believe this is, I suppose, a typical kind of anorexic. She was like, you're not, I believe the fact that you don't care so much about your weight and how you look. So then she did re-diagnose me with atypical anorexia because she was like, although it is brought on by depression, because of your symptoms, we still have to diagnose you with anorexia. But she was like, okay, because obviously I know I can see in you that you just want this to end and you want it to go. We basically together we planned my admission, and she got me in there within the week after. And yeah, it was just such a relief, I suppose, to have somebody just turn around to me and just say, after all those years of fighting against what they were saying, everyone else was saying, and really trying to fight my corner and like almost exhausting myself, it was so nice for her to just turn around and say, I actually believe you. And the whole way through that admission, she worked with me, and she'd do it with all of her patients anyway, but we had little kind of catch-ups with her once a week. And in that, she would just ask me, okay, is there anything else that we can do? Are there any other groups that you want to go to? Any like main hospital groups for stress or anything? And she got me into kind of as many groups as she could in order for me to just, I suppose, learn other coping mechanisms and to really delve into what exactly it was that was going on. In addition to that, she did actually also let me travel back to the services that I was under to continue with my CAT therapy, which had just started as I'd been admitted. And for those of you who don't know, it's cognitive analytical therapy. And what that does is it is different to CBT in that it doesn't focus really so much around how you feel. It focuses more about looking back and trying to pinpoint what's happened and in how you felt throughout those periods of your life, so that you can actually open up and actually be able to talk about it rather than just being like, okay, well, how do you feel today? How have you felt this week? It looks right back. And as part of that, it's very interactive in that you draw maps and you write letters to your therapist. They write letters back. And you can, like, with your therapist, then you're plotting how and trying to get a visual kind of image of how your mind is processing different things and how your head is working through any stresses or any points in your life where it may be a little bit tense or where something may be going on. And I found that really helpful to be able to go back through everything. So yeah, although with everybody else, she was just like, nope, you have to be, some people were on bed rest, some people they weren't allowed out. With me, she was like, this is going to be obviously your one outing for the week, but you can go, you can spend all day there. And that was really nice for her to still allow me to do that. So yeah, it was a very positive admission, I suppose. And the way that they had it set up as well was that there are 3 levels. So you'd go in, obviously, firstly on the acute level, which would be like a standard eating disorder unit where they would control your meals. You'd fill out a menu every day based on what was being served in the restaurant, I suppose, and you'd be on observation. So you'd be on level 4 observations. But then kind of as you went through that process, the more that they could, I suppose, see that they could trust that you weren't going to throw food on the floor or hide it up your sleeve and things like that, they would put you then into the adjoining ward. So they'd partitioned the ward into two, and they'd then put you on the other side of this partition, which was then progression stage. And that would then be where they'd start to give you back some of that control. And instead of somebody sitting there with you filling out your menus, you could fill it out yourself, but then obviously still eat with staff. And then you would go on to transition as you were coming towards the end of your admission, which would be that you'd be in full control. They'd give you a blank menu and you would pick everything that you want for that day, which would then be sent down to the restaurant. And then you were in charge of preparing your own snacks and making sure that you were having them on time. They wouldn't come and chase you if you didn't, because the whole idea is that you are taking back that ownership and you are being then in control of your recovery. And that was something that I found to be not only very unique, but so helpful in that it just starts to then renormalize eating, I suppose, and it starts to renormalize your life a little bit, and you start to see eating as just another thing in your day rather than it being the main focus of all day, every day, constantly thinking about it. Yeah, it was just such a positive experience, really, as opposed to the other two, which were just very restrictive and very reluctant to give you back that control, but then expecting you to leave and be able to take all of it all of a sudden, which I think, to be completely honest, is a pitfall in a lot of ways that eating disorders are treated, in that, you know, it's such a bubble in the wards, and you get so used to other people bringing you food and sitting with people and not being in control of what it is you're eating, which for some people can be quite a relief. But then they never really prepare you for the day that you're going to leave. Whereas having those different stages, it builds you up to that. And, you know, obviously then with their support still, even during transition, if there is anything that comes up, the dietitian there was very approachable and very knowledgeable. And she especially was just like, look, if anything comes up, if there's any problems, if you start feeling anything that you're worried about, just, you can still talk to people. So, yeah, I mean, it was just such a positive experience. And on reflection of that, it was a little bit like, well, why isn't everywhere doing it like this? Just because it would just help so many people, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it sounds really positive, doesn't it, to have a more stepped approach? You know, I think really definitely if you've got the resources and the ward has the sort of capability to do that, I can really see how it's very positive, isn't it, to feel that you've had perhaps quite a lot of practice at being autonomous and making those independent decisions before you are then back home. So, Katrina, can you talk a little bit more as well about the cat therapy? Like, I don't know how much you'll be willing to share, but I'm just sort of wondering, like, did you sort of notice, different perhaps patterns that you'd become caught in, maybe in terms of like relating to others, or how, you dealt with your feelings, or was there anything that kind of stands out for you when you sort of think back about the cat therapy and what you really learned?
Yeah, a lot of it was to do with relationships that I form with people. I suppose I have always had a little bit of an addictive personality, and I can form quite close attachments to people in my head, whereas sometimes the reality of that is completely different. So then transitioning from having a good relationship with somebody to then not having that relationship, I suppose when we looked back at it, I found that was particularly difficult. And I suppose as a result, I've always found it quite hard to make friends. I've always had a very small group of friends. And even now, which, to be honest, I'm quite content with now, but even now I've only really got my mum and then one of my close friends from school who I'm still in regular contact with, as well as my friend in Malta. And yeah, I mean, like before I would have been, I suppose, a little bit self-conscious of that and feel quite alone, that I didn't have anyone. But now that I've been through the therapy and actually realised it's not the end of the world. If you have a few people around you, then that's fine. At least you can count on those people. that's been quite helpful. But yeah, a lot of, I suppose, my stresses have happened around relationships and the relationships that I've had with people. So throughout my life, obviously growing up, my mum and dad separated when I was quite young, so I was only about 2. And I remember it always shocks my mum when I give her details of things that I'd seen, how vividly I remember little things from that. And yeah, and then throughout school, I was bullied quite a lot, I suppose, because I was on my own the majority of the time. And I was always a little bit different to everybody else. But that is always something that despite being bullied and things like that, I've always stuck true to who I actually am. So I'm always been quite proud of that. But yeah, I was bullied all the way through school. Again, as the older that I got, the more I was able to just shrug it off and just be like, well, okay, this is boring me now. But when I was younger, I'd build up that anxiety, and it would get that bad that I would, I suppose, make myself sick in the mornings just so that I'd have an excuse not to go to school. Because then I can just go and show my mum and be like, oh, look, I'm really ill, I can't go in today, because I was dreading going in. And then, yeah, that was obviously a point of frustration for my mum, because I wasn't actually telling her that I was being bullied. And yeah, and then during that as well, I was very close to one of my mum's brothers, and he passed away. And yeah, that was something that I found really difficult. And then moving on from that, nothing really happened until I was about 18, I guess. And I'd had a long-term relationship. We were together since we were both 15, and it lasted until we were about 21. But it was a very volatile relationship. Obviously, at first it was fine, but then it just started to turn really toxic. And it was actually after that the eating disorder, I suppose, really presented itself. And I always describe it that, the mask that I'd been able to put on, and this kind of fake happiness that I'd always been able to put on, had just been completely broken, and I'd just been completely beaten down, and I didn't have the energy to cover it up anymore and to cover up how I was feeling. So yeah, it's all been very focused around relationships, I guess. And that was a theme that did keep coming up a lot through cat therapy. And it was always something that I'd kind of been aware of, but in a way it was quite nice to have that validated by somebody and to say, actually, no, you weren't, this is something that perhaps you do struggle with and that you do find quite stressful at times. And yeah, mainly because as well, like my coping strategies, as I said, was to isolate myself. And part of that was by not eating, because yeah, I suppose then it would be just me, and it would be down to me, and that, I suppose, yeah.
Oh, well, thank you. I think it's so helpful, Katrina, that you can just share that really openly, because I think there's so much misunderstanding and so many sort of myths around eating disorders. But I think, your experience isn't, sadly that unusual. I think, for many people with eating disorders, when we sort of sit down in therapy and start exploring things that they've gone through, there've often been relationship issues or things like bullying or a stress like a bereavement, or it's often really nothing really to do with food. It's down to kind of different things that have happened, and and maybe the support that was or wasn't available at the time. Yes, I think it's really helpful that you can just sort of share that really openly, because I'm sure many people listening will really, really relate to a lot of this. So Katrina, how are you sort of doing today with your relationship with food and yourself, and how is life for you today?
It is a lot better than it was. I am very aware that I'm still, I suppose, it's not perfect, but I think having that awareness about it is just so much more valuable than not having the awareness of that. And I am actually now able to catch myself if I do start to feel like, okay, well, no, I am isolating myself and I shouldn't be. So yeah, in that respect, it has been quite valuable. I suppose the only downside to being in multiple hospitals, I guess, is that in that last admission I did get very close to one girl, and her name was Hayley. She was, again, it was one of those that they were just trying to treat her symptoms rather than the underlying cause, and that kind of, it wasn't really working, because no matter how hard they tried to, I suppose they did help her, but it wasn't enough, because they weren't treating or trying to help her with the underlying causes. And she actually passed away not last Christmas, the Christmas before. And I found that very difficult. And I do think about her a lot still. And yeah, it is still something that I do still have to catch myself with, because if I think about it a bit too much, I do start getting back into that retreating kind of feelings. But again, I think, going through all the treatment and everything, I'm a lot more aware of when that is starting to happen now, and I can catch myself with it. As far as like food is concerned, I don't have any problems with it at all, in the fact that I eat cake and chocolate every day. It's always been something chocolate has always been a bit of my vice. So I do make a point of eating it every day, because I'm like, you know what, why not? Life is too short. And especially in the eating disorder world, it is something that it can kill people, and it does. And you don't have to be necessarily underweight for that to happen either. So I think because of all of that, I just now think, well, life is too short. I don't really want to look back and think, oh God, I wish I hadn't had that cake at that time at Christmas that my sister had made. And, I don't want to think back and think things like that. I would rather think back and think, actually, I had a really good time. I didn't miss out on this event in my life because of the way that I was feeling about myself. I'd rather look back on my life and think, I've actually done things that I wanted to do. I've had those experiences that I wanted to have. And, food is going to be a part of that. Everybody has to eat, or you end up in eating disorder units, really, or not, as the case may be. Some people do fall through the gap, which is awful to think about. And I think especially now with lockdown as well, there have been a few reports, obviously, that it's becoming more prevalent in younger girls. And I guess, I would just like to highlight to a lot of younger girls who may be struggling with it, that if you need help, then ask for help. Just don't let yourself kind of fall through the gaps, because, there may be underlying problems that you can start to work through. And ultimately, it's not just a case of, okay, well, I'm not going to eat. Okay, I'll lose weight. It's not just that. You are actually damaging your body. I mean, for example, I am 27 and I've got the bones of an old lady because of what I did to myself in my eating growing up and down. I've got osteoporosis, and I shouldn't have that at my age. And I think that's the main message, I guess, that I want to get out to anybody who is struggling with it, is that it's not just losing the weight, it's you're damaging so much more in your body than you actually realise. And I suppose also to highlight that there are many different reasons as to why somebody develops an eating disorder. And, if perhaps people aren't able to access services at the minute because of what's going on, that maybe they can do some self-reflection, which is what I did a lot of, and even just draw yourself a few mind maps or something, just trying to pinpoint where it started. That can really help. Yeah, because it's doing all of that and doing all of that work. It has taken a while, but it's made me a lot more of a confident person. It's made me a lot stronger than what I was. And, in that respect, it's still something that I still have to catch myself on at times. But through doing all the work, I like to consider myself quite casual now around food, rather than obsessing about it all the time, which is quite nice. So there is light at the end of the tunnel, I suppose, is the main message.
Well, that's really great to hear, isn't it? And you're now training as well as a teacher, aren't you? Is that right? You're training as an English teacher? Yeah. Sure. So no, that's really positive to hear. Well, Katrina, thank you so much for coming on the podcast and just for sharing really openly, because I think it's really will give people such an insight into sort of like some of the deeper causes of eating disorders, and also just to really validate people's experience that it doesn't always have to be really driven by weight and shape. And it also really does give people, I think, just hope and inspiration about recovery. And, I guess it sounds like some of your treatment wasn't, the most helpful for you, but then it sounds like when you did get that good treatment, like the cat therapy and the consultant that really understood you, it was quite life-changing and did really help turn things around for you.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, well, thank you so much.
That's okay, thank you.
So I hope you enjoyed this conversation just as much as I did, and do go and check out all of Katrina's info in the show notes. So if you're not following me already, do seek me out on Instagram at The Eating Disorder Therapist. And if you're looking for more support in your relationship with food and improving body image, do go and check out my website, which is theeatingdisordertherapist.co.uk. And there's information there about my online courses, breakthrough days, and also training for counsellors in eating disorders and body image. So yeah, do go and check out the link. That's theeatingdisordertherapist.co.uk. So thank you so much for listening today, and I look forward to sharing another podcast episode with you very soon.